Hello everyone. So yeah, today we're going to have a workshop with Miss Phương from Miss Phương from Five Block. So we supposed to have an offline meeting today in the workshop, but I look over the window and it's raining really hard. So it's a good call, Phương. Hope that you will have a very good call today, just like you did with the workshop. Uh, with like with us moving the workshop to online. So
Yeah.
I think maybe we like spend like maybe 5 minutes for you to introduce yourself
Mhm.
and your journey in Web3. We wait until like we have around 20 people to come and then we can get started. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. I don't know if everyone can see my screen just yet. Can you? Okay, 1 second. Uh, Stop screen. Can everyone see my screen? Sorry, I don't know if I'm hearing anyone. Okay. I see a couple of folks commenting. Welcome everyone. So I hope if you guys in Da Nang, everyone is doing well, staying safe. Uh, so super excited. I was really excited to meet some of you guys in person today. But unfortunately, the storm and everything um, is not great. So stay safe. So today, I a couple months ago I met Hugh, and then I shared a couple of things. And so what I have a quick slide talking about myself really quick, but just a bit of context about this workshop today. So a couple months ago, I told Hugh that I work at Fireblocks, and then in the process of like selling to companies, I come across a lot of like RWA projects across Asia. It seems like something that the community might be interested in. So I offered to host a session and share some of the information that I am fortunate enough to work with over the years. So it's just a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in Da Nang, and my family lives here. But nowadays, I spend most of my time in Singapore. And spent a couple in between. I spent a couple of years in the U.S. and Europe, um, just studying, and then now I'm in Singapore working. A little bit about my Web3 journey. One of the companies that I first interned for is called Mass Network. It is sort of like a Chinese company doing VC investment for Web3, and they have a product as well. Not so much anymore, but that's my very first interaction. And I did product marketing and community building for Mass Network, and I learned a lot of things there. And my second touch with Web3 was when I joined a community in my university. So I went to Singapore Management University, SMU in Singapore, and I spent a year just in marketing and PR doing community building for the club, but also like for them to outreach to students in Singapore in general. So that's my another relevant. And currently, I am working at Fireblocks, a wallet infrastructure company for institutions. Yeah, so I cover a lot of the companies across APAC. So I work in sales and business development. So I cover a lot of the APAC region, including payments accounts, crypto native, so from DeFi to like RWA, to a lot of things that you guys probably are more familiar with compared to myself. And most recently, my personal interest, but also like something that I work with a lot, is on stable coins and blockchain use cases. So around using stable coins for remittance, for cross-border payments, for cross-border merchant settlements, and all that stuff. If you interested to learn more about that, let me know. We can definitely up to host another session to talk more on that as well. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. And to be very honest, I have not used StreamYard before. I don't know how people typically interact with each other here, but I can see a lot of comments. But I don't know if you guys are able to. If you are, feel free to like stop me anytime for any quick questions. Yeah, should we kick start to the actual presentation?
Yes. So just a little bit guideline on StreamYard. You can see on the right hand side. in the comment section, and anyone who comment on YouTube or in Twitter, you can see it there. So we live
Okay.
in three platforms. We live in Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Anyone comment, you can see it, and you don't have like you can answer them on the live stream. Okay.
Okay.
So the set is yours.
All right. Sounds good. So I guess let's get started with our workshop on RWA, huh? So just a little bit about agenda. There's four main points that I want to walk you guys through today. And I kind of structured them in like the question format. And then for each of the section, we basically will be answering what giving you the answer to these questions essentially. So the first part will talk about what's happening globally for RWA, some of the trends in the past few years, and what are some of the future developments. And then the second part will zoom in and focus more on Asia or Asia Pacific and more generally. And then the third part, I'll share some quick success stories, or I guess some of the projects that I have seen most recently. And then last but not least, some of the challenges that RWA is still seeing across Asia and globally. So first part, let's talk about what's happening across the globe for RWA. So I thought the best way to kind of start this is do a little bit of like a quick history of what's happening globally in terms of RWA tokenization. So if we look at 2023, very early on, I mean, crypto has been pretty much out there in 2023, but RWA was still pretty nascent in 2023. So what we saw in back then was 2 years ago was some of the BR announcement from like companies like BlackRock, Fidelity, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, talking about like, okay, they want to do these tokenization. They do public announcement, but there wasn't much material developments that coming out of 2023, mostly just around like news and stuff like that. Sorry about that. And so I guess moving on to early 2024, that's when we saw like the very first signal of institutional adoption of RWA tokenization. So with BlackRock, for example, they launched Buildo Fund, which is like a U.S. Sort of like U.S. deposit fund, money market fund actually, and they sort of like they became the first one of the global leading asset manager to issue a first money market fund, and the adoption was pretty great. Within the first few months, they crossed $1 billion in asset under management for this fund particularly. And then I think after that, we saw a lot of other companies following suit, U.S. company following suit in Wall Street. And then moving to late 2024, we started seeing more developments outside of the U.S. or more especially in countries that have relatively crypto-friendly regulations. So, for example, we see Switzerland. There's Taurus Group and State Street. They collaborate to tokenize one of the first fund in the region. In Abu Dhabi, UAE, we see a company called Realize Wealth Management to tokenize a T-bill fund and offer it to institutional investor. And it closer to home in Asia, in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, they collaborated with DBS Bank and JP Morgan. So DBS Bank is, if you don't know, they're basically like a national bank, the de facto national bank for Singapore, and JP Morgan, I'm sure you guys all heard of. And then they all collaborated together on Project Guardian, and then they to push for tokenization of bond deposit, particularly the use case around cross-border collaborations and settlement. So that's sort of like where we ended in 2024. And then moving on to this year, 2025, we started seeing more like real regulatory changes, particularly in the US. I want to cite two examples. The first example is the Genius Act. And if you guys don't know about it, it's basically outlined a really pretty somewhat advanced framework for stablecoins. And then however, it's a lot more than that, which gonna bring me to Clarity Act, which basically, if you think of like the regulation in the US, the Genius Act basically focuses on stable coins only, and then the Clarity Act sort of like aims to amplify that and complete like the regulatory framework in the US expanding to or defining assets such as tokenized securities and asset in general. So essentially, Clarity think of Clarity Act as like an expansion beyond stablecoin use case or like stablecoin framework in the U.S. And why I want to mention the U.S. in particular, just because like if you think about leading economies, a lot of country kind of wait for the U.S. and like companies in Wall Street to kind of do something before uh, they have enough confidence to do it or explore something in like a completely new space. Which among us, crypto probably not super strange, but for a lot of the TradFi institutions out there, it is an unknown domain for them. So they basically, but the TLDR is everyone is waiting for everyone to do something, right? And fast forward to today, end of 2025, we started to see real adoptions from other companies, which I will show a little bit of example later in this presentation. So question from Ted. So Clarity Act is an expansion of Genius Act on stablecoin asset in general. So think of like with the Genius Act is solely focused on stablecoins, particularly for stablecoins within the U.S. It does regulate some aspects of like companies like overseas or international company wanting to expand into the U.S. But mostly again, stablecoin. Genius Act is only stablecoin. For Clarity Act, it's actually a lot more than just stable coins. It include like tokenized securities and tokenized assets in general. So actually, it's kind of moved away from like focusing on stable coins when it comes to Clarity Act. And then, however, with Clarity Act, that's still something that is being developed in the U.S. and they actually have not passed anything official. There's it's still being discussed in their among their legislative functions in the U.S. I hope that kind of answered the questions. All right. I think the next point I want to talk about is just like how we're seeing RWA tokenization grows over the last few years. Sorry. So if you look at this graph, it started in 2019, right? And then fast forward to 2025, and you can see in like, as I mentioned, in early 2023, we don't see a lot. So probably mostly just around public credit and then a little bit of like maybe stock, barely any. And then moving to, you can kind of see how the market has been growing super fast in the last 1 year. So I kind of zoom in this graph a little bit more to kind of show you guys from the starting of 2025. So we can see January 1st, 2025 until now, like 1st of November. We can kind of see that the overall volume of the market from here, maybe like around less than 20, maybe around 17, 18. And now we've seen that doubling, almost reaching $40 billion. And if you come back to the previous graph, obviously that was not the case in like previous year in 2021 to 2022 or even to 2023, right? So it's definitely like a big jump that we're seeing globally across all different asset class. All right. So let's talk about a little bit more about what's happening today globally, right? In terms of institutional adoption and infrastructure, beyond BlackRock, which is probably the first company that have enough confidence in crypto to actually do something big enough. Now we're seeing more major financial institutions like traditional asset manager and banks who are moving away from pilot or BOC to production. And why this point is important, because in my experience working with traditional financial institutions, they talk a lot about piloting and POC. It's just a way for them to kind of like go to the board and say that, hey, look, we are innovating, but we don't have enough confidence. And the fact that they are these companies, these institutions are moving straight to productions, or I guess moving to production, is a signal for everyone to kind of like watch out for RWA, right? So if you want to look for more example, you can read about Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, Wisdom Tree, some of the largest financial institutions or some of the largest asset managers in the globe. They each own some sort of like money market fund or some sort of platform that offer tokenized securities. Particularly like for Wisdom Tree, which I talk about a lot in my line of work at Fireblocks, just because Wisdom Tree is a Fireblocks customer. So particularly with Wisdom Tree, if you're not familiar with Fireblocks, and this is in no way of me selling Fireblocks, just wanted to use an example to kind of tell the story of Wisdom Tree. So Fireblocks is basically an infrastructure provider for institutions, and we do anything from custody, crypto custody, to payments, to tokenization. Also, sorry to interrupt real quick. I know I can speak a little fast sometimes, so if you guys are not catching up with me, feel free to comment and let me know. So back to Wisdom Tree. So Wisdom Tree actually leveraged the tokenization infrastructure from Fireblocks to launch 2 different platforms. Yes. So Fireblocks is actually known for MPC technology, but that is one of the things that Wisdom Tree leverages us for. But another thing is on like the tokenization part. So with Wisdom Tree, they basically leverages Fireblocks to introduce 2 different platforms. I forgot what's the name are, but one platform is for institutional investor, and the other one is for direct to consumer. So for retail investor like you and me, or the average person, right? And then with Wisdom Tree, they basically leverage Fireblocks MBC technology or MBC wallet, enable user to enable investor to hold the asset on their platform. At the same time, they also leverage Fireblocks tokenization infrastructure like smart contract templates to tokenize some of these assets that they already manage today. So that's on asset manager. If you look on the banking side, you have names like Goldman Sachs and BNY Mellon, who announced fund tokenization offerings to their investor, I think in the last 3 months. If you Google, I'm sure you see a lot of articles around those. And then last but not least, we also see more, in theory, they not really TradFi, but they still in like pretty much in the Web2 space, which are like Robinhood and eToro, which are some of the largest, retail investment or brokerage platforms for stock, for bond, for fund, mostly for retail investors. And we see eToro and Robinhood have been offering tokenization of U.S. equities and stocks on their platform. So that's sort of on the adoption side from institutions. And then on sort of like the infrastructure side, we see blockchain infrastructure is maturing. So we think of, when we think of like what is needed for RWA tokenization, you think about, okay, what is needed for you to issue or to put something on chain, right? So you think about issuing platforms. Do you want to do it through smart contracts, even smart contract or Solana smart contracts? How do you keep these assets? One, you put them on chain. What wallets are you keeping? Are you using a third-party custodian service who are going to host the private key on your behalf? And then last but not least, I think another common question that come about in RWA tokenization is like, how do you make sure the real asset match what's on the blockchain, right? So one example is, let's say you want to tokenize gold, right? So think of, you have a bunch of gold today and you want to put them on the blockchain. How do you make sure that you tokenize, you tokenize what you have, right? What if you tokenize more than what you have or less than what you have? So we think of oracles like Chainlink, who comes in to bridge the gap between Web2 and Web3 data. Happy to, it's just for, because of benefit of time, I don't think I have we don't have the time to go too much in depth into that. But if you have questions around this, happy to answer now or later in the Q&A section. Just 1 second, taking a sip of water. Right, and then next, talking about regulatory developments. So increasingly across the globe, we're seeing more regulatory maturity, and it's in fact clarity around regulation and legal frameworks actually seen as driver of growth for RWA tokenization. And I'll talk a little bit more about the reasons why in later slides. And then moving on to the second part of our agenda, which is what's happening in Asia. First, as I mentioned in the previous slide, right, regulatory clarity and legal frameworks are important to drive these developments. And that's why we're starting with this. And when we think about Asia and like, the financial hub, we typically think about Singapore and Hong Kong, right? Just for a couple of reasons. Historically, these countries have always positioned themselves as like the global financial and trading hub in the region, right? And then also recently, in recent years, these countries have made a lot of commitment to kind of like advance themselves in the region and actually globally when it comes to regulation for crypto and for any sort of like on-chain asset or on-chain transactions, right? And in fact, like with Singapore, for example, they probably have one of the most advanced regulation globally when it comes to crypto or anything digital assets. And we see a lot of regulators in Asia, but also like other parts of the world, sometimes taking Singapore regulation as like a framework or a benchmark to guide them forward. So let's talk about Singapore first. What is in place? So for context, if you don't know much about Singapore, they a lot of the activities when it comes to trading to financial activities is usually regulated by Monetary Authority of Singapore, which the short form is MAS, if you can see here on the slide. So they basically is the one who, sort of, for lack of a better word, gatekeep a lot of the regulations for the country when it comes to not just traditional finance, but also like Web3 financial activities. So one of the most advanced framework is called Digital Token Service Provider, DTSP, and they actually just launched that earlier this year in June 2025. And this is probably one of the most advanced framework that we have across the region, but also globally. If you look at developing or very developed country. So active effort in Singapore, what's happening is that people start to see that MAS is publicly pushing for production and commercialization of RWA's platform. And however, I think what's interesting is that we still haven't seen a lot of like very big success stories that coming out of Singapore with that make like really big global headline. And if you ask me the reason, to be honest, I don't know. That's something that I'll be definitely interested to find out more if anyone has the answer. In terms of like what all of these things mean, right? Singapore, as I mentioned, has always aimed to be like the global, sort of like the regional financial hub for the region. And then with RWA particularly, they want to become a compliance issue and hub. The keyword here is compliance, right? Because Singapore has a lot of regulations. And the reason being, they want people to know what exactly you're looking for without guessing, right? So if you are a tokenization provider or any sort of platforms that want to come into Singapore and do business, you have to be ready with their DTSP framework, from getting the license, making sure that you have like anti-money laundering measure in place, making sure that you have the proper custody control, governance, and then disclosure to authorities in any case, right? So that's kind of about Singapore. Moving on, I want to talk about Hong Kong a little bit, just sort of like another hub. In fact, I think in the TradFi world, most companies will see Hong Kong as like a bigger financial hub, or like, I guess, when it comes to like stock trading, bond and all that, asset management, all that stuff, usually they think of Hong Kong, but I think Singapore is moving closer to that and probably already kind of overtook Hong Kong place when it comes to like digital assets, right? Um, so what's happening in Hong Kong today? In May, earlier this year, May 2025, they finally passed a stablecoin licensing bill. However, what's happening is that it's actually it creates a lot of challenges for companies because it seems like the licensing framework is a little bit too strict, and most companies are, kind of second guessing whether Hong Kong is the place for them to be. And however, I think one more recent development is that SFC, which is Security and Financial Security and Future Commission in Hong Kong, which regulate most of the financial activities. They have an explicit roadmap to develop virtual asset and tokenization, which also include RWA tokenization. And most recently, this month, actually in November 2025, they introducing a pilot scheme prioritizing the RWA projects and allowing some, more flexible regulation for companies so that they can innovate and they can also promote participation in the Hong Kong market when it comes to RWA tokenization. Um, in effect, what does that mean, right? So if Singapore is think of it becoming like a compliance issuing hub, I think Hong Kong pretty much stay in like their position that I have always been before, becoming just like a trading hub in general for anything around stablecoin, maybe for cross-border settlements, and then also tokenized security, just because they already have the infrastructure for like traditional trading, like in equity and derivatives, those things in Web 2, and they basically want to translate some of that into like the Web 3 world. However, I think one main challenge that Hong Kong has been seeing is that like sort of like the increasing cross activity between Hong Kong and mainland China has sort of like both additional concern for investor or company wanting to go to Hong Kong, because now they have like Hong Kong becoming increasingly closer to China. That means um, you know con- risk level management is crucial for both sides, and companies going into Hong Kong, definitely something that they need to keep an eye out for, with the new sort of like regulatory regime, right? So that's kind of Hong Kong and Singapore. And then you guys might think at this point, like, okay, what about other countries in Asia? And then I actually took a really quick snapshot of what we probably all know, which is the Global Adoption Index by Chainalysis in 2025, right? And if you look at all the country in the top, you see India as top one, Pakistan in third position, Vietnam in four, Indonesia, Philippines. Going down, you can see Bangladesh, Korea, Thailand, Japan, etc. So what about these countries? What's happening, right? So with India and Pakistan, who are on the top three, interestingly, they don't have. So in fact, in Pakistan, until a while ago, digital asset or crypto in general actually not legal. Like it was illegal for a while. And then in India, it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't heavily regulated, and there hasn't been, and there isn't at this point in time any regulation for digital asset just yet. It's more of like a registration that companies. So like if you see centralized exchanges coming out of India, it's more of a business registration rather than a licensing framework that they have meet and they are applied and they have applied for. And one interesting things that I'm seeing is that because of the proximity of Pakistan and India to the UAE, which have really crypto-friendly regulation, a lot of companies who are running out of Asia, running out of India and Pakistan physically, they actually tend to get to apply for a license in Singapore. Sorry, tend to get a license in UAE, VAS license, VASP, and then sort of like from a legal standpoint, they're running out of the UAE, but operationally and present in terms of physical presence, they actually still, a lot of them are still running out of these country. And maybe in terms of founders, I also see them splitting their time between like their own home country and then UAE, just for a variety of reasons. So that's India and Pakistan in top three. If looking at like ASEAN, we look at countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam. So all these countries today, they don't really have much of an advanced regulation for RWA tokenization, particularly for RWA tokenization, right? And why do I say that? In the Philippines, there has been a framework for digital assets for quite a long time. They actually were one of the the early countries that do that. So one of the largest exchange in the region, coins.ph or BDAX, from the Philippines, they have a lot of success in the region because of the way that the Philippines regulation has been set up in the early days. However, for RWA tokenization, there hasn't been any headwinds around that, and there are a couple of ways that project can kind of get around. So Philippines has a special economic zones and free ports, which basically is You can kind of view it as a sandbox region where companies have more flexibility and authority, or like um, autonomous to rights and control to test out and innovate things. So that's on the Philippines. And then on Indonesia, recently, earlier this year, or I think last year, OJK, which is the regulatory body that regulates all of like the financial activity, and most recently, they are also in charge of driving digital asset activities in Indonesia. So they issue a regulatory sandbox very recently, and then we've seen some companies that want to tokenize gold, carbon credit, real estate, who are in the middle of line to get into the sandbox, or they already get some sort of license or approval from OJK to kind of start experimenting with them. So it's actually already live and then going pretty well. In terms of Malaysia, we seeing Malaysia, they also have a pretty somewhat framework for digital assets. So security, the Malaysia Security Commission (SSC), they have an onshore framework that regulates crypto exchanges, custodian services, and also and then like security, sort of like the STO, which is security token offering, sort of like an ICO platform. You think of it in more of a Web3 way. And this is mostly for onshore activity. And these are like on the onshore activities, you are allowed in Malaysia, you are allowed to kind of, market to Malaysians in the country. Another interesting thing that in Malaysia is also there's part of Malaysia called Labuan, and it's sort of like an offshore region, and then it's mostly regulated by Financial Authority of Labuan (FSA). And then in this region, it's more of an offshore region, and I'm seeing a lot of companies operating not just in Asia but also across the world, registering in Labuan and then operating their digital asset service. And one sort of reason that I can think of why companies do this, a couple of things. Like Malaysia is a pretty major Muslim country, and they have regulation, they have like requirements around compliance for religious sort of like commitment, right? For the lack of a better word. So other Muslim country or Islam-based country, they seeing this as an advantage, and with Malaysia and with Labuan particularly having these somewhat of a framework that kind of encouraged them to come and register their activities. So that's for Malaysia. Vietnam today, we don't have a regulation, unfortunately. But I'm sure if you guys are following the news, we're seeing more, and hopefully we'll see something interesting in the next 1 year. So that's pretty much for regulation. I know I might miss out some countries, just going back here really quick. Um, so we're seeing like Korea, for example. RWA is still pretty nascent, and recently there's been a lot of changes in Korea. So in May this year, they have a new president, and then he's been pretty pro crypto. So they're seeing a lot of changes in the country, but mostly around crypto trading and stable coins rather than like anything with RWA. For Thailand, nothing around RWA tokenization yet, to be honest. A lot of things are around like digital asset trading, crypto exchanges, stablecoin sandbox for tourists. Yeah, that's kind of about it. Right. Yeah, hopefully Vietnam has something interesting next year. So what are some of the recent success stories? I think in my when I introduced this session, my plan was to share some of the examples of projects that I have worked with over the years. Unfortunately, I think for the benefit of time today, we probably don't have. I promise I'll probably host another session to talk more in depth about what these projects are doing, what are some of the flows that they're doing, and how do it work, right? So for this session, I'm just gonna go through a quick some example that I'm seeing personally. I love to see if you have any projects that you personally know of. I love to read more about them. Feel free to kind of put them in the chat or the comments, and happy to read more. So one interesting project that I think is super exciting is RM Network. So they're coming out of the Philippines, and they actually tokenizing gold. So if you don't know much about Philippines, it's actually very similar to Vietnam, in the sense that people buy a lot of gold. Like people buy gold to store as a storage of value, and then so in they RM Network, basically the problem that they're seeing is, okay, like if I buy gold, what if I want to buy a lot of gold? I don't want to handle the complexity of buying gold and then making sure that it's locked somewhere. So what they do is they basically go on chain, right, allowing people to buy, settle, transfer almost instantly. So I put their website here if you guys are interested in having a look. I believe they already gone live, so you can actually try it out if you want to buy some on-chain gold. Another example is D3 Labs coming out of Indonesia. So they are working pretty closely with, yeah, Tethergold and Oro, pretty interesting. Actually, just for this part, I'm actually focusing more on like the APAC region. And then on D3 Labs, the company coming out of Indonesia, they actually pretty active with engaging with the regulators, and what they're trying to do is building like a private blockchain, or rather like a semi-private blockchain to enable RWA tokenization. And they think of like all type of assets from real estate, carbon credits, all that stuff. And their vision is to sort of like bridge the regulatory gap in Indonesia at the moment. So basically, right now in Indonesia, there is no if in order for you to kind of buy or own some sort of tokenized assets, there's a lot of KYC steps that you do need to go through. D3 Lab kind of removes some of that complexity by providing blockchain, right? Um, Sorry, just going back to the RM network example, why people choose to buy gold at RM network but not Tether? Good question. I actually don't know the differences. I love to kind of check into that and see. My guess is like a couple of things, because RM Network, for example, they do great community work, and maybe they have like pretty good brand in the Philippines, right? And then people tend to buy from what they trust, rather than just Tether. Maybe, and they also like RM Network, for example, they also want to target some of the Web2 traditional Web2 users, who might not necessarily have a Web3 wallet of their own, like who might not be very familiar with the whole Web3 experience. In that case, they probably might be opting for ARM network. Again, I'm sure there are a lot more reasons out there. Be interesting. I'll be interested to kind of know, and I'll take a look and see if I can share something afterwards, after this workshop today. So after D Labs, I have like two other example more of like in the Web2 world. So these news actually came out pretty recently. So if you see the piece of news on the website, it's actually came out like a couple days. Actually, it came out like 2 days ago, so 4th of November. And then Tao Gas, which is one of the largest like energy company in Hong Kong with link to China, they have their first RWA tokenization project. And what they did was basically they buy a bunch of facility, but they need funding for it. So they tokenize these and allowing people to own pieces of it. In that way, they can get the facility, like credit facility, while building these infrastructure for their energy service and offerings in the future. Another example is real estate firm tokenizing real estate. Again, like the problem with real estate that a lot of people say is like, okay, I want to invest in real estate, but I don't have a lot of money. How do I do it? Well, I mean, the simple answer with RWA tokenization is like you just buy a small piece of that, right? Real estate is actually, in my opinion, from what I see, is pretty commonly after gold in terms of like what is being tokenized across the globe. Yeah, so that's some examples. And last part that I want to talk about is like what are some of the existing or like the remaining challenges that we're still seeing today with RWA tokenization. Right. The first part is like liquidity and tradability. Think of like today, like for your in your personal experience, think of like how many RWAs focused platform that you guys can think of and use. I bet it's not so much, right? And because of I think that is like many tokenized RWA platforms today, they have pretty limited primary and secondary markets, right? So think of like a bunch of factors like a low number of active holders, limited transfer volume, not enough people knowing them, and then even if the secondary market is good, a lot of them have problem with primary market as well. Like if you have a small platform and you're not growing fast enough, people are not going to come in there and buy more new stuff from you, right? Because like maybe like your value proposition is not good enough to attract people away from traditional platform. Like logically, if you think about investment, you basically have the same amount of money, and then you need to decide where to put your money, right? And if the ease of putting your money in like a Web2 asset class is a lot easier, then you would go for it logically, right? Unless there's something that you dislike about a platform particularly. So today, like a lot of the primary markets and RWA tokenization platform, they don't have that much of an attractive value proposition to attract enough of a number of investors to drive the initial liquidity. And then if they do, then the problem comes to secondary market activity, which as I show above. Second challenge is standardization and interoperability, which is pretty much a problem or like a challenge that we still see across DeFi, right? We When it comes to like having multiple chain, multiple platforms, different token models, super difficult to bring them from one place to another, right? And then for example, talk about like cross chain interoperability. Like if I have like a token that's issued on Polygon or like an EVM chain today, it's not easy to bring them to Solana. And then if I do end up bringing them to Solana, how do I sort of like resolve the issue of like burning the initial token on EVM and then bring it to Solana or vice versa, right? So that's pretty still nascent, and we don't have like globally and regionally, we don't have a good solution or provider to kind of solve these problems just yet. And I think one interesting point that I want to mention now, because like we sort of like in the super team um, workshop, is that like unfortunately Solana is not yet the go-to chain for RWA tokenization today. Most of the tokenized asset today exists on limited number of chain, and they mostly Polygon, EVM compatible, so like Ethereum mainnet L1 or like Polygon, Arbitrum and all that. So I guess a couple of reasons, because of like EVM smart contract has always been like the go-to choice for a lot of developers, right? Or just because some developers have a lot more experience with EVM smart contracts, or they just don't know how to do Solana smart contract, or they just think it doesn't work, right? But however, I think a couple of things that kind of help to solve a problem that we see growing is some names like Chainlink or Layer Zero. You guys can kind of look more into it and see what they do. But for Chainlink and Layer Zero, they basically help to provide sort of cross-chain facility to sort of migrate asset from one chain to another. I won't go too much in depth. Last but not least, we also see complexity around regulation and operations. So, as I mentioned, I think there's been a lot of like developments around regulation across the globe, or like in Asia particularly. However, like if you look at these regulations and law, tokenized asset or RWA tokenization haven't really found a clear fit in the existing legal frameworks of a lot of these countries. So what's happening is they either have a completely new framework for digital assets, which takes a long time to develop, or the other case is they have like these tokenized assets are forced to fit into the existing framework of a country, which is also like not easy, right? Because tokenized asset and traditional assets exist and like behave in very different ways. So that's another challenge. And then in terms of like, if you want to come to a country token offering like an RWA tokenization platform, you need a lot of money and you need a lot of coordination. You need a lot of relationship. Let's say, for example, let's take an example of how this might play in like a real estate tokenization platform, right? Let's say you own a piece of land in Singapore and you can't sell it, you want to sell it to like small retail investor. How do you go about registering that assets when you have so many investors, first of all? And what if these investor, what if I sell it to my friend? Like, how do they change the owner legally on paper? That's another thing, right? So that's just like a small example of how like existing or like evolving regulatory framework could have implication on like RWA tokenization. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for me. I went a little bit over time, but happy to answer any question that you guys might have. Just gonna scroll back on some of the things that so Ted, you asked which industry will be beneficial as tokenized RWA is rising. Wallet infra. When you say industry, do you mean like traditional finance industry or like Web3 segments? Okay. Um, I guess I don't know if you still hear Ted. So maybe I'll just answer it in both ways. Industry beneficial, I think in strat probably like equity, around equity trading. Like if you think of countries like we in Vietnam, and then you think of more developing country, it's not okay. The ecosystems around it. Okay. Just kind of gonna finish my point. If you think of like developing country, it's super hard to get access to like equity trading in like more developed country like the US, right? So obviously like stock tokenization is something that's gonna grow super fast. And in fact, like it's already doing pretty well. If you look at startups like X stocks, in Singapore, or there's another company called Shift, SHIFTX, sorry, SHIFT stocks. They also tokenize their US stocks and offer it across Europe and Middle East. In terms of like ecosystems around it, anything that involved, I don't. I think it's a little bit early to kind of see or say who will be beneficial the most. You suggested like wallet infra. It could, or it might, or it might not, because like if you think of, depends on what kind of wallet infrastructure you think about. Like if you think of direct custody wallet infrastructure, which means like as an investor, as a user, you don't have the private key to the wallet. That will probably not make a lot of sense in the long run, right? Because like for me, I probably would just go to like a traditional Web2 brokerage platform and buy some kind of stocks, or like buy something, right? Or buy like a real estate fund, like a REIT. For non-custodial wallet infrastructure, so companies like Rivi, which was acquired by Stripe recently, or like there's a company called Dynamic, which Firefox also acquired recently. I think they might be doing well, at least in the short term. Long term, honestly, no idea. And then we seeing like new tokenized RWA project coming out every day. Like recently at Token 2049 in Singapore, probably like 1 in every 5 people that I spoke to, they're doing something with like RWA tokenization, and I hear like a lot of things that I probably like. I was pretty surprised. Real estate, not super surprised, but like depending on the country, I hear like tokenizing diamond or like precious stones. So or tokenizing like niche metals, or anything other than gold, like copper and stuff like that. Again, like I think there's definitely space for Web2 ecosystem around like maybe metal trading to benefit from this. But also like for Web3 ecosystem, I think it might be a little bit early. Maybe for DEX, they can offer decentralized exchanges. Maybe they can start offering trading of these tokenized assets. But right now, we don't have that many yet. Okay, so Murphy note, what the RWA model do you think that is suitable to apply for in the Vietnam market? Can you elaborate more? Like, are you thinking of like once Vietnam has a regulation, what would work pretty well, or just general like if you want to start today, like what is the best way, and like what are some of the asset classes that Vietnamese people are interested in?
Phương, I cannot hear you. I think your mic is, yeah.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay, sorry. Um, I was reading the question of Murphy note. Regulation. What is the RWA model that's suitable? I don't know. Like, I think it's a question for the regulators to answer. um there's a lot of interesting things. I think like example of Aurum network, for example, they tokenize gold. And if you guys know anything about Vietnam or Vietnamese people, a lot of people buy gold, right? My family, a lot of my people in my family buy gold. So that might be an interesting one. Another interesting thing I think could be like credit facility. So as if you guys go back to a couple of slides back that I share about Tao gas, I think that could be another interesting things as more foreign direct investment coming to Vietnam, and they want to open more factories, more facilities. They can actually tokenize these facility or land and then sell it to people. And then once they finish building and then generating profit, they can kind of give back to the token holder. That could be another interesting use case. And I just heard it once during token from someone coming from Vietnam. So let's see how it goes. Um, yeah, probably real estate is interesting one. I don't know how the regulation would come about though, just because like, how are you gonna how are you gonna register the owners of these different pieces of real estate?
Yeah, I someone called me to like join the conversation. So maybe I have a question for you. Uh, I see a lot of like regulation on regulated assets, right? Like gold, real estate. What about we when we tokenize something that is like not really heavily regulated, like tickets, like time, something like that. If have like for young builder, they want to go to where there was like least resistant as possible. So do you think like going to that area when you have like not a lot of regulation around ticket, around time, is that a good idea? And like, is there any regulation problem with if we go into that from your experience?
I I mean personally, I don't think it's gonna be an issue because these like because for regulation they usually care a lot about financial assets and financial activities, right? But ticket and time aren't. Um, and I actually have seen a couple of platforms doing tokenizing concert ticket or like time. So basically like they create a platform and then there's a bunch of like founders or like community builders, and then they sell part of their time. Maybe like a founder want to hear their advice, they do that. However, I think the problem with that is like it takes a lot of effort for marketing, and teams that have just started, they just don't have the budget to fights with companies that have been super established. Like if you think of their competitors, it's not going to be a Web3 competitors. It's going to be like Ticketmaster. How do you compete with Ticketmaster, right? Or for time, like how do you compete with like a company like Upwork? Because if you think of like if you compare it in very like close sense, it's not going to be like another Web3 platform that can be. It's most likely going to be a Web3 platform. So it's not so much of a regulation problem. It's more of like resource problem.
Yeah, I see. That's a real problem. But that's interesting to know.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any issue with regulation around that. Right.
Yeah, so maybe like still want to keep you around for a few minutes because maybe people still have questions. Thank you very much. I think this is the first call that I have seen so many questions. Normally, the call will be like me and the speaker. We have like maybe 2 to 3 questions, but today you really did make a fire in here. Thank you very much for this. Um, Maybe another question is like coming from the crowd is so right now we kind of like moving, for example, Super Team right now, we are working with various company. Um, Earlier this year, we have an MOU to work with Galaxy Innovation. That is a technology arm of Sobico, and they have airlines, they have banking and other things. And recently, we're working with APAC, which is like a corporation as well. They own real estate and factory and other things. The question for one of the questions that I repeatedly see is like those companies they are owning real assets and now they want to go into blockchain and they're quite like, okay, what is the model that I can study myself to learn like what to do? And also like working with the super team is one sort of information, but the one they want to do it themselves, want to study about real world asset in other chain as well, because super team is like we exclusively on Solana. So what is your advice? Like someone with access coming in enterprise, put in the enterprise context, and they want to explore. So what is your advice? Oh, I don't hear you. I think I lost your voice.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So I think generally around like enterprise, not sort of like not to be dismissive or not to be pessimistic about it. I think most of like the established enterprises out there, they don't have what it takes to do it everything by themselves. And working in Fireblocks and then selling to a lot of like the very traditional financial institutions, the more I do it, the more I think that they need help. Not in like a bad way, but like just it's gonna make things so much easier for them, first of all. It's gonna, it comes with a couple of benefits by getting extra help, right? First of all, like it's time to market. Do you want to drag out a project for like 3 to 5 years and then like by the time that you finally make a decision, it's not going to be relevant to the market anymore? So time to market, right? The second one is like resource allocation. Like, do you want to hire additional engineers to work on this new project, or are you going to take away some of the existing engineering resources that you might have allocated to other projects, but now you're kind of pulling them away, right? So resource allocation is another thing. And then the third thing is just like expertise, right? I believe personally, I believe companies should do what they do best, and if they're not really good at something, they should do it with other companies. Not to say that they should not do it themselves, like they should get some help externally. And there's company like, I mean, again, like just trying not to sell Fireblocks, but there's company like Fireblocks, or you can even look at our competitors. When I sell to people, I encourage them to look at our competitors, Fireblocks competitors, just because like I know you are smart, like you, my customer, but I know you smart, you're capable of making decisions. You should look at all the options that are out there in the market and gather all the information and make the decisions for yourself. Um, that's one thing. And I think like, and then in the process of like getting these additional help or talking to more company, you also get to learn a lot about what they're seeing in similar market or similar companies, right? Yeah, so that's sort of my personal take. Perfect.
Thank
All
you.
right, I think we almost at time. I know there's a couple of things that there's a couple more things that I wanted to share further on, maybe like a little bit deep dive on like how platforms like Aurum could work. I'm happy to organize another session maybe in the next 2 months to kind of share if you guys want to come back to that. I'll communicate further details, or if there's any topic that you guys are interested in learning more about. As I said, not just around like RWA tokenization, but also payments. And I know Solana is sort of like trying to position themselves as like the blockchain for payments, right? So this is definitely really interesting to see. So if that's a topic of interest, happy to come back and share more.
Yes, I think reward access and payment is a big topic that we all want to like welcome you again for that. So maybe if you have like some information, some have like homework for the community to do. So like if we do homework and we go to your workshop, it will be better, right? We have like more insight to share. So maybe after this, share with me all the resources. I will post it to the Twitter
Yeah.
for everybody to come.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Phương, for coming.
Bye bye.
Thank you. See you again soon. Bye bye, guys.